Hello and welcome to Astrofic, your weekly dose of fun, relatable astrology content where we apply astrology to fictional characters to find out why they're like that. But first, let me explain how this works and who I am. Hey, I'm Celeste, and I've been studying astrology off and on for about 5 years now, but it's always been present in my life. Within the past couple of years, I began practicing the art of reading birth charts, and this podcast is just another tool for me to apply and familiarize myself with all that I've learned. However, this podcast is intended for entertainment purposes only. I will be explaining the astrology as I go, but I'll be explaining it as I understand it, and I am by no means an expert. Making this podcast is fun for me because I get to ramble about my favorite characters and astrology combined. And while I hope you learn something, you very well may not. Either way, the more you know about astrology, the more you'll enjoy this podcast. So I do encourage all my listeners to passively take in as much knowledge as they can. For this podcast, I will be using the whole sign house system because it is just a much more basic outline of the house system and fits better with the format of a podcast where I can't show you the physical birth chart. When it comes to what birth date I use for characters, I will use canon birth dates if they exist to make it more challenging for me to work with the characterization. But before we get started, let's take a little break for our advertisements. On today's episode of Astrofic, we're going to be talking about Michael from The Good Place. Canonically, his birthday is just a bunch of zeros because he's a demon, so I just made a bunch of shit up for him like I did for Zuko. This one was a bit harder than Zuko though because I kept changing my mind. I've been binging The Good Place while I was writing this episode, and Michael just changes so much that I wanted to reflect that in his chart. The kicker is, though, that he kind of does it all at once. This is definitely an episode where I could revisit it later after learning more about astrology and then decide my take was all wrong and I need a do-over. Either way, we're going to tackle Michael's birth chart today, starting with his sun sign, which is in Taurus. Michael gives me such earth sign energy. Like, of course he's an old Taurus man. He wears bow ties. Plus he's played by Ted Danson, who is a Capricorn. Also, just a little tease, but I did make Michael a Capricorn rising. And I didn't even look up what sign Michael's actor was until writing this episode just to prove a point. Michael's just got a bit of that Venusian spice from being a Taurus. He likes the finer things in life, or in immortality, I guess. Yeah, his job is important to him, but other things are more important. And that's the effect of his Taurus sun pulling his Capricorn rising towards the Venusian way. I mean, you can't beat the bull. You can't win against the bullheadedness of a Taurus. In the end, Michael's ego gets his way. Now, part of that is because he's a sneaky little demon dude, so kind of predictable, but I did give him a Scorpio moon. He's very conniving and he always plays the long game, but he does have a lot of emotions even as a demon. The other demons make fun of him for it too. Michael may have a lot of earth energy right off the bat, but that water sign moon is what makes him enjoy the variety of human emotions. He might say that he hates how many emotions humans have, but secretly he's jealous. Scorpios tend to just hate what they're jealous of because they're a transformative sign by nature. So why can't one of their many iterations just be like whatever or whoever they're jealous of? It's sort of an Ouroboros situation because there will always be something or someone new to be envious of. As I said before, Michael's rising sign and first house as a result is in Capricorn, which means that he is ruled by his Saturn placement, which sits directly opposite his rising sign in Cancer in the 7th house. We'll talk about that in his 7th house, but just so you know, that's where it is. As a Cap rising, Michael is a pretty diligent worker. He had the mindset that if he just did this thing for long enough, he would finally get his flowers. Well, he didn't really get his flowers, but he got rewarded pretty nicely in the end. Michael is very good at coming up with plans of action and beginning the execution, and sometimes he can even manage obstacles as they come up. But usually he's not that capable of looking at things from a different perspective. That's why he bonds with the humans so much, because they can provide a very different way of perceiving things. Prime example of Michael not being able to execute what he begins is when the judge lets them run their first test with that like horrible, racist, misogynistic guy, Simone, that blogger or whatever who picked on Tahani like her entire life. All of that. Prime example. Like he breaks down 5 minutes before he has to greet the first human. Very much a literal example of what I'm talking about. But Michael doesn't have any other placements in his first house except his rising, so we're going to hop on over to his second house. Michael's second house of financial stability, values, and such is in the fixed air sign of Aquarius, are all in direct relation to the self and your immediate environment. The bottom half of the chart also represents the structures in place in your life. The two houses I associate most with like learned behaviors and structures are the second house, first house, fourth house, and sixth house. I see the second house as a look at how someone was taught to behave towards stability, and the fourth house is a look at the stability that was present in someone's early life or childhood, and the sixth house is a look at the stability that the person tries to implement in their daily life. Now, I'm saying all of this because Michael's second house in Aquarius only has one planet in it. Pluto, the planet of transformation, change, death, rebirth, etc. Now, Michael was simply a cog in the machine of the afterlife for a very long time, but there came a point where he began to question everything he thought he knew. That's the Aquarian influence. And then when he realized that the afterlife did not work fairly, he made the sacrifice of uprooting his entire immortal life in order to fix it. This is Pluto's influence in the second house. I mean, if he had failed, he was going to be retired. He would have literally ceased to exist if they had failed. And all of that is Pluto, baby. Michael has no placements in the third house, so we're going to skip over to the fourth house of home, family, and roots. As an immortal demon, Michael didn't really have any family except for the other demons. However, they weren't a real family because the demons are all literally assholes. Like, they're demons and that's their thing. But Michael never really behaved like that at the same intensity as the other demons because the demons were never meant to be Michael's stand in for a family. Demons like Sean probably saw other demons as family, but Michael has always been different in that regard. I feel like he was always meant to make a different kind of family, which is exactly what he did with the humans. Now, you're probably wondering, Celeste, why are you saying all this? We know Michael and the humans are found family trope. I just wanted to make sure we were on the same page about Michael's relationship to the humans because I think his north node is in the fourth house. His fourth house is in Aries, a fierce and passionate fire sign. Michael did everything he could to protect the humans and get them into the good place. He literally went to the ends of the universe to save their souls. He was really channeling that Aries energy, taking all kinds of risks. I mean, they went to the IHOP. That was crazy and scary and kind of gross. But he did it because it was always his destiny to create a family with them and to do everything in his power to create a safe afterlife for the humans that he'd grown to care for so much. Next, we have Michael's fifth house in Taurus. The fifth house rules over creativity, leisure, short term romance, and all things having to do with children, such as childhood and childlike joy. You may recall that I gave Michael a Taurus sun, which means his sun sign is in this house. I think that Michael really shines the brightest when he's engaged in the things that make him giggle like a child. In Taurus, I feel like the sources of such joy kind of only make sense to Michael because it's always tailored to his specific taste. I mean, only Michael can find this much joy in simple human things like car keys. And he doesn't even care that others don't pretend to understand his happiness because it's his. I think that's a beautifully Taurus thing to do. Now, Michael does have one other planet in the fifth house, Mercury. I think Michael is very good at selling his ideas to people and getting them to understand his vision. However, as we know, Michael doesn't always tell the whole truth. Taurus's sister sign is Scorpio, the master of mystery and ultimate depth. So Taurus and Scorpio have the different sides of the same coin dynamic going on. A Taurus Mercury will only tell you as much as they think you should know in order for their plan to be successful. This is so clear with just all the secrets Michael keeps from the humans, even when they start working together. I've recently learned something about what it's like to have your sun and another planet in the same house, specifically specifically Mercury, as I have my Sun and Mercury in the same house and sign as well. And funnily enough, they're in Scorpio, which is opposite Michael's. That's so funny. Anyways, what I learned is that the sun will kind of burn whatever planet is in its proximity. I think this is especially true if they're in conjunction. So what that means in practicality is that the sun or the ego will overshadow the planet present and kind of get in the way of the planet doing its thing. In this case, I think that manifests as Michael having a kind of frazzled, frantic mind, since Mercury also rules over thinking and thought processes. This dynamic can make Michael have batshit ideas that don't fucking make sense, like rebooting the humans over and over and over and over and over again and not telling Sean. That whole thing is definitely a Sun Mercury interaction. His ego got too big. He got too big for his britches. His head was so full of hot air, and he could not communicate any of his fuck ups or anything to anybody. And I mean, probably because he didn't want to get retired because of his failure, but still, I think it has to do with his Sun and Mercury being in the same house. The next house, the sixth house, is in Gemini. The sixth house rules over daily routine and structure as well as general health. As a demon, Michael doesn't really have to worry about his health. He's simply an immortal being, and we don't see him as a human enough for me to get a grasp on what his health situation is, aside from the general decline in one's body as they age. I think the way that time moves in the afterlife is evident in this house as well because Gemini is a mutable air sign. It moves sporadically and often without any discernible reason for moving the way that it does. Now he also has Jupiter in this house, and Jupiter is a planet of luck and expansion, but it is in detriment in the sign Gemini. Michael's struggle with meaning and needing things to do, I think it can be seen here. The lesson Michael has to learn, which he does by the end of the series, is that his daily life can be incredibly impactful on his mind and his mental health. He stops feeling good when torturing humans and starts to feel bad because Gemini has prompted him to think outside the box and think about the way his actions are impacting other people. So it's expanding his life, but in a way that almost feels painful to him, which isn't normally how Jupiter works, but because it's in detriment, it's how I can see it working in Michael's chart. All right, making our way up to the top half of the birth chart, Michael's seventh house is in Cancer, which rules over long term relationships and contracts of any kind, including marriage and friendships, and the relation of the self to the other. I think this is a beautiful house to have Cancer in because Cancer is ruled by the moon. It's a deeply feeling, caring, and nurturing sign. And I mean, Michael literally self appoints himself as Eleanor's stand in father figure, and I'm sure in his head he was the stand in father figure for the rest of the humans too. But that's the house on its own, without the placements I've given him in this house. The first one being Saturn in Cancer. Saturn can be representative of father figures or authoritative energy, once again driving home his self appointed role as father figure to his human friends. Saturn is a restrictive, malefic planet, but this gives it a bad rap. Saturn isn't all that bad. It focuses on massive growth before you will be rewarded and change of habit. In Michael's case, he had to deal with billions of Jeremy Bearamys without friends or family, in which he had to grow internally and really self reflect. And since he's a Capricorn rising, this is his ruling planet. It hits him extra hard. When Michael committed to being on the same side as the humans, it became his identity. And yet, when questioned incessantly by other demons and even the judge, all Michael could say in his defense is that they're his friends, he loves them, and he wants the universe to treat them fairly. And that's so beautiful, but it was a concept that the other immortal beings could not understand, especially the judge. I think Michael is one of the most well written characters in modern television, and that's a high bar because I think there are so many well written characters in modern television, a few of which are actually just other characters in The Good Place. So if you haven't seen it but you're listening to this episode, I highly recommend it. And also, sorry for all the spoilers, but you asked for it and the show came out quite a while ago. Alright, enough about Saturn. I'm an Aquarius rising. I'm also Saturn ruled. I love Saturn. But Michael has one other placement in the seventh house, Cancer. his Chiron. Chiron is an asteroid, and it is known as the Wounded Healer. I think that is kind of self explanatory. I don't think that the way Michael lived as a demon without any real friends or family is something he'd wish on his own worst enemy. Michael's relationships with others is what spurs him on, but it is also how he was hurt the most because he didn't have any close relationships prior to starting the neighborhood with Janet. By the way, their friendship is one of the purest friendships ever, and they're such amazing friends. They're so cute. Anyways, Michael's relationships or lack thereof is ultimately what creates this Chiron wound, and he wants to keep other people from experiencing the same thing. We've reached the 8th house in Leo, and Michael has his Venus here. I don't know what it is, but I sure do love to put a Venus in the 8th house. The 8th house rules over shared wealth, the occult, sex, death, rebirth, and all that great taboo stuff. Now, in Leo, all of that stuff can become kind of a focal point in one's life. And since Michael's a demon, that makes perfect sense. Demons get pleasure and amusement from taboo things and horrible situations or creations. With a Venus in Leo, Michael really enjoys words of affirmations and generally being given attention. Hearing that the humans trust him fills his heart with glee. There is so little genuine, unfiltered happiness that the characters get to experience that when they do, it's very obvious to me. Also, Venus in 8th house can add a bit of obsession to their love for others. The only other house that Michael doesn't have any placements in is the 9th house, so we're going to skip over that to the 10th house in Libra. Michael has 3 placements present in the 10th house, but they're not all planets, so he doesn't have a stellium. Let's start with the one that isn't a planet, Lilith. I think Michael's darkest side of him was apparent when he was still on the side of the bad place and actively working as a demon. The bad place folk do care about balance and fairness, but they think that what they're doing is the correct course of action because it has been for millennia, and they think that humans are terrible, terrible beings. They think that humans are inherently evil, and therefore they are serving justice by torturing them for eternity in the afterlife. And that's not even mentioning the fact that this is in the 10th house, which rules over public image, reputation, social status, stuff of that nature. So this is inherently linked to Michael's reputation and career. Now, let's add the planets into the mix. Michael has both Neptune and Mars in Libra, the 10th house, so let's start with Neptune. Neptune is a planet of delusion, imagination, spirituality, and things of that kind of ethereal nature. Not only does this affect how other people view Michael, it also affects Michael's actions around his reputation and career because of Mars's presence. Michael's big ideas about the afterlife are possible in part because of his Neptune in Libra. He believes that a new form of the afterlife is possible, one that is more just and fair, attributes related to Libra. But the great part is that he also has Mars to back this up. So not only does he have these ideas, but he can actually do something about them, and he does. Everything that they accomplished is only because Michael had the gumption to get up and fix the system he could see was broken in the first place. He could have just ignored the humans and kept resetting them and torturing them and killing them if he wanted. This Mars placement is also why Michael was capable of climbing so high up the demon ranks before he defected. He did eventually reach senior staff after all. That's a big deal. If he hadn't already switched sides, his Capricorn rising would have been so pleased. Well, I mean, I bet it was anyway. All right, just a couple more placements and then we're done. In the 11th house, we have Michael's Scorpio moon. While a Scorpio moon sounds scary to people, it doesn't have to be. I mean, it still will be a little bit because Scorpio is scary, but it's not as bad as you think it is. Yes, Michael is terrible at feeling his emotions, and when he displays his emotions, it can get kind of weird, but it's just how it is. In the 11th house of community, friend groups, and other larger collective social situations, the moon is actually a nice placement to have, I think. Maybe not paired with his 7th house Chiron, but no matter what, Michael does place a lot of his own value in emotional stability. Maybe not paired with his 7th house Chiron, but no matter what, Michael does place a lot of his own value and emotional stability on how his relationships with others are currently. It's not an option for him to not care about what others think of him, and that's okay. There has to be someone to fulfill every type of role after all. Some people care what others think of them, some people don't. Personally, I don't. But Michael does, and that's okay. There isn't much more to say about that, as Michael doesn't have parents or a childhood for me to relate his moon to, so let's just jump into the 12th house Sagittarius. The only planet left is the planet of Uranus. This is a planet that values eccentricity and authenticity above else. And in the life of the party fire sign Sagittarius, it's up to no fucking good for sure. I think I'm cussing a lot more this episode because it's about a demon. Anyways, the 12th house is about spirituality, the subconscious, the collective, and other situations such as surrender, suffering, and ego death. When Michael had his ultimate ego death, he just became like a 70-year-old bachelor. He went wild. All he wanted to do was party and drink, and he had a sports car. That's very Sagittarius to me. But the partying ultimately led to the new structure of his life. With the 12th house in Sagittarius, it's at least a bit easier for Michael to go with the flow as he makes realizations about how horribly the afterlife is structured. And with Uranus helping to push his transformation along, there was really no one more perfect to help overhaul the afterlife system than Michael. Unfortunately, that is about all I have for our beloved demon turned human Michael. And seriously, if you haven't seen The Good Place, I cannot recommend it enough. This is one of the rare forms of media on this show that I will actually avidly recommend that you consume if you have not already. You won't hear that a lot. Anyways, if you enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating and review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Share it with your friends. Check out my Patreon. Follow me on TikTok and Twitter. Reach out. I'd love to hear feedback or your thoughts about the show. If you want to find me on socials, I've put all my links in a handy dandy link tree in the show notes. That's linktr.ee/celestialbinch, BINCH. You can find all my socials, ways to tip me if you want, and all the other ways to listen to Astrofic there. You'll also find my Patreon there, where you can provide direct feedback about Astrofic as well as receive monthly collective readings. My name is Celeste, and you've been listening to Astrofic. Tune in next time to find out why our favorite characters are like that. Bye!